You're standing in Alaska, at the northernmost edge of a continent, in a land where civilization's grip weakens with every mile traveled north. This is America's largest state, yet it feels nothing like America. There are more mountains here than people, more bears than towns, and more wilderness than roads could ever hope to cross. The landscape stretches in every direction with a scale that makes human presence feel accidental, temporary. Like a brief experiment the land is allowing to continue for now. Alaska does not welcome settlement the way fertile valleys or coastal plains do. It offers survival, not comfort. The climate shifts violently. Winters bring darkness that lasts for months. Cold that reaches depths machinery wasn't designed for. And isolation that tests every system humans have built. Summers explode with life, light that never fades, and a brief window where movement becomes possible again. This is not a place shaped by human ambition. It is a place where humans exist by constant adaptation, adjusting themselves to forces they will never control. A frozen wasteland with no value. They were wrong about the value. Gold, oil, fish, and strategic position would prove them spectacularly wrong, but they were right about one thing. This land does not bend easily to human will. Alaska spans 665,000 square miles, larger than Texas, California, and Montana combined. Yet only 730,000 people live here. If you spread that population evenly, each person would have a square mile to themselves. But the population is not spread evenly. Most cluster in a handful of cities, leaving vast regions where towns are separated by hundreds of miles of roadless wilderness. The state has only 5,000 miles of paved highway. By comparison, Rhode Island, the smallest state, has 1,100 miles. The road network in Alaska doesn't connect most communities. Instead, it traces a few stubborn lines through valleys and along coasts, ending abruptly where engineering becomes impossible or where the cost of maintenance exceeds any practical return. For hundreds of settlements, the outside world arrives by plane, by boat, or not at all. Weather determines schedules. Fog grounds flights. Ice closes rivers. Storms strand communities for days or weeks at a time. Modern Alaska still operates on nature's terms, where plans are provisional and patience is not optional. Yet it never feels entirely urban. Moose wander through residential neighborhoods. Bear warnings appear on hiking trails within city limits. The Shugok Mountains rise directly behind downtown, their peaks snow-covered year-round, indifferent to the traffic and construction below. This is the state's economic and transportation hub, where cargo planes arrive from Asia and connect to routes heading south. Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport handles more cargo than almost any airport in North America, a testament to Alaska's geographic position between continents. For travelers, Anchorage is the entry point, the place where roads still exist and modern infrastructure still functions as expected. But even here, nature imposes itself without asking permission. In winter, temperatures drop so low that car engines are fitted with block heaters to prevent oil from freezing solid overnight. Daylight shrinks to a few hours, and darkness stretches across most of each day. In summer, the sun barely sets, and the city glows under a twilight that lasts nearly all night. Time feels less fixed here, shaped more by light than by clocks. Anchorage exists because geography allowed it. The coastal location offered access, and the mountains behind provided a barrier against worse weather further inland. But the city knows its place. Every building, every road, Every structure is built with the understanding that this is not friendly ground. Foundations run deep to resist frost heave. Roofs are designed to shed snow. Survival here requires engineering that accounts for conditions most places never face. At 20,310 feet, it is the tallest mountain in North America, a peak so massive it creates its own weather systems. Clouds form around the summit, storms brew without warning, and visibility can drop to zero in minutes. The mountain was called Denali for thousands of years by the Athabaskan people, meaning the High One or the Great One. In 1896, it was renamed Mount McKinley after a presidential candidate who never visited Alaska. That name held for over a century, a reminder of how easily distant authority can rewrite local geography. In 2015, the original name was officially restored, a quiet correction of historical dismissal. Denali dominates the landscape for hundreds of miles. On clear days, which are rare, the peak is visible from Anchorage. Its white massif rises above everything else, pulling the horizon upward. But most days, clouds obscure the summit entirely. Many visitors to Denali National Park never see the mountain. They arrive, they wait, and they leave without ever catching a glimpse. The land reveals itself when it chooses, not when humans schedule their visits. The national park surrounding Denali covers over 6 million acres. Only one road penetrates it, a 92-mile gravel route that winds deep into the interior. Private vehicles are restricted beyond the first 15 miles. Access is controlled, not by policy alone, but by terrain. The road is narrow, unpaved, and vulnerable to landslides and washouts. It closes frequently for repairs and remains impassable in winter. Climbing Denali is not a casual endeavor. Each year, around 1,000 climbers attempt the summit. Roughly half turn back before reaching the top, stopped by altitude, cold, or weather. The mountain kills regularly. Between 1932 and 2023, more than 100 climbers have died on its slopes, claimed by falls, avalanches, hypothermia, and altitude sickness. The cold here is unlike cold elsewhere. At high altitude, temperatures can drop below 40 F even in summer. Wind speeds exceed 100 mph. Frostbite can occur in minutes. Rescue is difficult, sometimes impossible. Helicopters struggle at high elevation, and storms can ground aircraft for days. Climbers who get into trouble often have to get themselves out, or wait in tents while conditions improve. The mountain does not negotiate. It simply stands, immovable and indifferent. Summer days can exceed 90 F. Hot enough to feel tropical if it weren't for the boreal forest and permafrost just beneath the surface. Winter, however, is something else entirely. Temperatures in Fairbanks regularly drop to 40 F, and occasionally far lower. In January 1934, the city recorded 66 F, one of the coldest temperatures ever measured in North America, outside of Canada and Greenland. At these extremes, exposed skin freezes in seconds. Breath turns to ice crystals in the air. Metal becomes brittle. Rubber shatters. Machinery fails. Locals adapt with rituals born from necessity. Cars idle for hours in parking lots. Engines running to prevent freezing. Electrical outlets with block heaters line parking spaces. Windows are covered with plastic sheeting to trap insulating air. Homes are built on pilings above the ground, preventing heat from melting permafrost and destabilizing foundations. Fairbanks is also one of the best places on Earth to witness the aurora borealis. The city sits directly beneath the auroral oval, the region where charged particles from the sun interact most intensely with Earth's magnetic field. On clear winter nights, When darkness stretches long and temperatures plunge, the northern lights appear overhead in curtains of green, red, and violet, rippling across the sky in patterns that shift and pulse in silence. The university here, the University of Alaska Fairbanks, operates research facilities focused on permafrost, climate, and Arctic systems. Scientists study ice cores, monitor glacial movement, and track changes in ecosystems that have remained stable for thousands of years. Fairbanks is a city built on observation, where the land itself is the subject, and survival depends on understanding what cannot be controlled. A military construction project driven by fear that Japan might invade Alaska during World War II. Thousands of soldiers and civilian workers carved the road through forests, mountains, and muskeg, working around the clock under conditions that killed equipment and broke bodies. The original road was rough, barely passable, and required constant maintenance. Today, it is paved for most of its length, but nature still reclaims sections regularly. Frost heaves buckle the surface. Permafrost melts and shifts the roadbed. Landslides close lanes. In winter, black ice and snowdrifts make travel treacherous. The highway is open year-round, but that does not mean it is safe or reliable. For many Alaskans, the highway is the only land connection to the rest of North America. Goods arrive by truck. People drive days to reach medical care, family, or supplies unavailable locally. The road does not offer convenience. It offers the possibility of movement when conditions allow. Towns along the highway are small and widely spaced. Gas stations, motels, and repair shops cluster at intervals, serving travelers who understand that running out of fuel or breaking down between settlements can be life-threatening. Cell phone coverage is sporadic. Emergency services are distant. Self-reliance is not a value here, it is a necessity. There are no roads connecting Utqiagvik to the rest of Alaska. Planes and barges bring supplies. Everything else must be produced or improvised locally. Winter here lasts from October to May. During that time, the sun does not rise above the horizon for more than 2 months. Darkness is total, broken only by streetlights, vehicle headlights, and the aurora overhead. Temperatures drop to 30°F or lower, and wind from the ocean makes it feel colder still. The sea freezes solid, extending the shoreline with ice that stretches miles from land. In summer, the sun does not set for more than 2 months. Daylight is continuous, disorienting, and exhausting. The body loses its natural rhythm. Sleep becomes difficult. Time feels less structured, more fluid. The ground thaws slightly at the surface, but permafrost remains just beneath, making construction difficult and limiting what can be grown. Traditional whaling is central to life here. Each spring, as the ice begins to break, bowhead whales migrate through leads of open water near shore. Hunting crews, using methods passed down through generations, harvest whales under strict quotas managed by the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission. The meat is distributed throughout the community, shared in a practice that predates modern government by thousands of years. Utqiagvik is also where climate change becomes visible in real time. Sea ice forms later in the fall and melts earlier in the spring. Coastlines erode as protective ice diminishes. Permafrost thaws, destabilizing buildings and infrastructure. Traditional hunting routes change as ice patterns shift. Polar bears appear more frequently in town, searching for food as their habitat shrinks. For the people who live here, adaptation is constant. Modern tools and traditional knowledge exist side by side. Snowmobiles have replaced dog sleds in many cases, but the understanding of ice conditions, weather patterns, and animal behavior remains rooted in generations of observation. This is not a community clinging to the past. It is a community adjusting to the present while maintaining practices that still work. This term describes the majority of the state, the vast regions accessible only by plane, boat, or snow machine. Hundreds of small communities exist here, ranging from a few dozen to a few hundred residents, scattered across tundra, forest, and coastline. In these villages, life is fundamentally different. There are no grocery stores stocked with produce from distant farms, no hospitals with full surgical capabilities, no hardware stores where parts can be purchased off the shelf. Everything must be flown in, shipped during the brief open water season, or made from what is available locally. Mail comes by small plane. Weather permitting, medical emergencies require evacuation flights that can take hours to arrive, if weather allows them to fly at all. Fuel is expensive, sometimes costing 3 or 4 times what it costs in Anchorage. Heating a home through winter can cost thousands of dollars, a burden that forces many families to choose between warmth and other necessities. Subsistence living is not a lifestyle choice here. It is an economic reality. Hunting, fishing, and gathering provide a significant portion of the diet. Salmon, caribou, moose, seal, and berries are staples. These activities are regulated, but they are also essential. Without them, survival in remote Alaska would be financially impossible for most families. Many bush communities are predominantly Alaska Native, with deep cultural ties to the land. Languages like Yupik, Yupiaq, and Athabaskan are still spoken, often as first languages. Traditional knowledge about weather, wildlife, and seasonal cycles informs daily decisions. Elders hold authority not from titles, but from experience accumulated over lifetimes spent reading a landscape that does not forgive mistakes. Alcoholism, suicide, and domestic violence rates are higher in bush Alaska than in urban areas. Isolation, lack of economic opportunity, and the trauma of cultural disruption contribute to these crises. Access to mental health services is limited. Support networks are small. In winter, when darkness dominates and travel becomes nearly impossible, the weight of isolation intensifies. Yet these communities persist. They persist because people have lived here for thousands of years. They persist because the land, despite its harshness, provides. They persist because leaving means abandoning not just a place, but an identity, a language, and a way of understanding the world that cannot be replicated elsewhere. Each year, billions of pounds of seafood are harvested from Alaskan waters, including salmon, pollock, crab, and halibut. This industry employs tens of thousands of people, generates billions of dollars in economic activity, and supplies fish to markets across the globe. The work is brutal. Fishing vessels operate in some of the roughest seas on Earth, where storms develop with little warning and waves can exceed 30 feet. Decks are slick with water and fish slime. Machinery moves constantly, indifferent to fingers and limbs. Crews work shifts that stretch beyond exhaustion, processing fish as fast as they are caught, because delay means spoilage and lost profit. The Bering Sea, in particular, is notorious. It is home to the Alaskan king crab fishery, where boats pursue one of the most valuable catches in the world. King crab season lasts only a few weeks each year, compressing the entire harvest into a narrow window when weather is often at its worst. Crews can earn substantial sums, but the mortality rate is among the highest of any profession. Boats sink. Crew members are swept overboard. Hypothermia can kill in minutes if someone goes into the water. Salmon fishing is less dangerous but no less grueling. Fish return to rivers in massive runs, and the timing is everything. Miss the peak, and the season is lost. Overharvest and future runs collapse. The state manages fisheries with strict quotas, closures, and monitoring, attempting to balance economic need with ecological sustainability. It is a delicate equilibrium, one that has failed in other parts of the world, but so far, Alaska's management has kept most fisheries stable. Processing happens on shore in towns like Kodiak, Dutch Harbor, and Cordova, where canneries operate around the clock during the season. Workers arrive from all over the world, drawn by the promise of work that pays well but demands everything. Housing is temporary. Hours are long. The work is cold, wet, and repetitive. But when the season ends, people leave with money they could not earn elsewhere. And the town's empty again, waiting for the next run. Oil was discovered at Prudhoe Bay on Alaska's North Slope, one of the largest oil fields ever found in North America. The discovery transformed the state's economy, but getting the oil to market required solving a problem no one had faced before: how to move millions of barrels of oil across 800 miles of wilderness, mountains, rivers, and permafrost. The solution was the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, an engineering project so ambitious it seemed almost impossible. The pipeline runs from Prudhoe Bay to the port of Valdez on Alaska's southern coast, crossing 3 mountain ranges, more than 800 rivers and streams, and hundreds of miles of frozen ground. It is elevated on supports for much of its length to prevent heat from the oil from melting permafrost beneath. Construction began in 1974, and employed more than 70,000 people at its peak. Workers endured temperatures that dropped to 60 F, winds that made standing upright difficult, and isolation that tested mental endurance. The project cost $8 billion, the most expensive privately funded construction project in history at the time. The pipeline operates continuously, moving crude oil south at a rate of around 500,000 barrels per day, down from over 2 million barrels per day in the 1980s. The oil is warm when it enters the pipe, heated to keep it flowing, and it moves through a system designed to withstand earthquakes, extreme cold, and the shifting ground beneath. Oil revenue transformed Alaska. The state collects taxes and royalties on oil production, money that funds government services and infrastructure. In 1976, Alaska established the Permanent Fund, a savings account where a portion of oil revenue is invested. The fund now holds over $70 billion, and each year eligible residents receive a dividend check, a direct payment that can exceed $1,000 per person. But oil production has been declining for decades. The easy reserves have been tapped, new discoveries are smaller and more expensive to develop. The state's budget, heavily dependent on oil revenue, faces increasing pressure as production drops and prices fluctuate. The transition to renewable energy, while necessary, threatens the economic model Alaska has relied on for half a century. These rivers of ice have shaped the land for millions of years, carving valleys, grinding mountains, and depositing rock and sediment in patterns that define the geography. But the glaciers are retreating. Measurements show consistent, accelerating loss of ice mass. Glaciers that once advanced now pull back, leaving behind barren rock and newly exposed landscapes. The causes are well understood: rising global temperatures, changes in precipitation patterns, and feedback loops that accelerate warming in polar and subpolar regions. The retreat is visible even within a single human lifetime. Photographs taken decades apart show dramatic differences. Glaciers that filled valleys now end miles further back. Lakes have formed where ice once stood. Rivers have changed course as meltwater finds new routes to the sea. Glacier Bay National Park, in southeastern Alaska, is a living record of this change. 2 centuries ago, the bay did not exist. It was filled with ice, a solid glacier stretching miles inland. As the climate warmed following the Little Ice Age, the glacier began to retreat. Today, the ice has pulled back more than 65 miles, exposing a network of fjords, islands, and inlets where forests are beginning to take root in soil only recently freed from ice. The retreat is not uniform. Some glaciers lose mass faster than others, depending on their size, elevation, and exposure to warming. Some have stopped retreating temporarily, held in place by local conditions. But the overall trend is clear, and it is accelerating. The consequences extend far beyond Alaska. Melting glaciers contribute to global sea level rise. As ice melts and flows into the ocean, it raises water levels incrementally. Alaska's glaciers alone contribute a measurable fraction of the total rise observed worldwide. Coastal cities thousands of miles away will be affected by what happens here. Brown bears, also known as grizzlies, are common across much of the state. They fish for salmon in rivers, dig for roots on hillsides, and wander through valleys with a confidence that comes from being apex predators. Encounters between bears and humans are frequent in some areas, and the state manages these interactions carefully, emphasizing education, bear-proof food storage, and avoidance rather than confrontation. Black bears are even more widespread, found in forests across the state. They are smaller than brown bears but no less capable. Both species are protected but also hunted under regulated seasons. The balance is managed to maintain healthy populations while preventing conflicts with humans. Moose are everywhere. They wander through cities, stand in rivers, and cross highways without concern for traffic. Collisions between moose and vehicles are common and often fatal for both the animal and the vehicle's occupants. A full-grown moose can weigh over 1,000 pounds, and hitting one at highway speed is like hitting a wall. Caribou migrate across the Arctic in herds that can number in the hundreds of thousands. These migrations are among the longest terrestrial migrations on Earth, covering hundreds of miles between calving grounds and winter ranges. The herds move in loose, flowing formations, navigating terrain by instinct and experience passed through generations. Wolves hunt the caribou, along with moose, sheep, and smaller prey. Wolf populations are politically contentious in Alaska. Some see them as essential parts of the ecosystem, maintaining balance through predation. Others see them as competitors for game animals, arguing for aggressive management, including aerial hunting. The debate is not settled, and it never will be, because it reflects fundamentally different views of what Alaska should be. Marine mammals thrive in Alaskan waters. Humpback whales feed in the nutrient-rich seas during summer, breaching and tail-slapping in displays visible from shore. Orcas patrol the coast, hunting seals, fish, and sometimes even whales. Sea otters float in kelp forests, cracking shellfish on rocks balanced on their chests. Seals haul out on beaches and ice floes, vulnerable to predators but essential to the food web. Salmon are the foundation of Alaska's ecosystems. 5 species return to rivers each year, traveling from the ocean to the exact streams where they were born. They fight their way upstream, navigate waterfalls, and spawn in gravel beds before dying. Their bodies provide nutrients to the river, to the forest, and to every creature that depends on them: bears, eagles, wolves, and humans alike. Alaska sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, a zone of intense volcanic and seismic activity that encircles much of the Pacific Ocean. The state is home to more than 130 volcanoes, over 50 of which have erupted in recorded history. These volcanoes are not dormant relics. They are active, monitored constantly, and capable of significant eruptions with little warning. Mount Redoubt, located across Cook Inlet from Anchorage, erupted as recently as 2009. The eruption sent ash clouds 50,000 feet into the air, disrupting air travel and blanketing nearby communities in fine volcanic dust. Ash damages aircraft engines, clogs machinery, and contaminates water supplies. The threat is taken seriously. When eruptions are detected, airspace closes and flights are rerouted. The 1912 eruption of Novarupta, in what is now Katmai National Park, was one of the largest volcanic eruptions of the 20th century. It ejected more than 30 cubic kilometers of material, burying the surrounding landscape under feet of ash and creating the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, a desolate expanse where fumaroles steamed for years afterward. The eruption was heard hundreds of miles away, and ash fell as far as Seattle. Earthquakes are even more frequent. Alaska experiences thousands of earthquakes each year, most too small to be felt, but large quakes strike regularly. In 1964, the Great Alaska Earthquake, magnitude 9.2, the second most powerful earthquake ever recorded, devastated Anchorage, Valdez, and surrounding areas. The quake lasted more than 4 minutes, liquefying soil, collapsing buildings, and triggering tsunamis that killed people as far away as California. Valdez was destroyed. The entire town had to be relocated to a new site. Anchorage's downtown buckled, with streets dropping several feet and buildings tilting at impossible angles. The disaster killed 139 people and caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. Today, the risk remains. Seismologists monitor the fault lines beneath Alaska, knowing that another major earthquake is not a question of if, but when. Buildings in Anchorage are designed to withstand seismic forces. Emergency plans are rehearsed, supplies are stockpiled. But no amount of preparation can fully eliminate the threat. The ground beneath Alaska is unstable, always shifting, always carrying the potential to move violently without warning. It is called the last great race on Earth, a test of endurance that pushes mushers and dogs to the edge of human and animal capability. The race follows a route used for centuries, first by Alaska Native peoples, later by gold miners and mail carriers. Each musher runs a team of up to 16 dogs, bred and trained for this singular purpose. Alaskan Huskies are not purebred show dogs. They are working animals, selected for stamina, speed, and the ability to run in temperatures that drop to 50 F or lower. The bond between musher and team is total. Trust is absolute. A dog that falters can cost the race. A musher who misjudges conditions can end up stranded or worse. The trail crosses frozen rivers, mountain passes, and stretches of exposed tundra where wind erases visibility. Checkpoints are spaced miles apart, small outposts where mushers rest briefly, check their dogs, and resupply. Rest is mandatory, but it is never long enough. Sleep deprivation becomes a factor after the first few days. Hallucinations are common. Some mushers report seeing things that are not there. Animals, people, lights in the distance. The race takes between 8 and 15 days, depending on conditions and the musher's experience. Winners cover the distance in just over a week, averaging more than 100 miles per day. For those who finish near the back, the journey is slower, harder, and no less impressive. Not all teams finish. Dogs can be injured or exhausted and must be flown out from checkpoints. Mushers sometimes withdraw due to equipment failure, injury, or sheer exhaustion. The race does not forgive mistakes. The conditions do not soften for those who struggle. Finishing the Iditarod is an achievement in itself, regardless of placement. The region is a maze of islands, channels, and fjords carved by glaciers and now filled with cold, nutrient-rich water that supports an extraordinary abundance of life. The Inside Passage winds through this region, a protected waterway used by ships, ferries, and small boats to travel between communities. Towns like Juneau, Ketchikan, and Sitka are accessible only by boat or plane. There are no roads connecting them to the rest of Alaska or to each other. The Alaska Marine Highway System, a state-run ferry service, functions as the region's primary transportation network, carrying passengers, vehicles, and cargo between isolated ports. Juneau, Alaska's capital, sits at the base of mountains that rise steeply from the water's edge. Glaciers flow down from the ice field above, including Mendenhall Glacier, which ends just miles from downtown. The city is surrounded by wilderness, accessible only by air or sea, an arrangement that makes governing Alaska from here both symbolic and logistically complicated. Tongass National Forest covers most of southeast Alaska, the largest temperate rainforest in the world. Ancient Sitka spruce, western hemlock, and red cedar grow densely, their canopy filtering light into a green twilight. Rain falls frequently, feeding moss-covered undergrowth and streams that run clear and cold toward the ocean. This is one of the few remaining intact coastal rainforests, a landscape that once stretched along the entire Pacific coast but has been logged almost everywhere else. Logging has been controversial here for decades. The timber is valuable, and jobs in remote communities are scarce. But the forest is also irreplaceable, home to species found nowhere else, and critical to the salmon runs that define the region. The debate continues, shaped by economics, ecology, and the tension between extraction and preservation. Extending nearly 1,200 miles toward Asia. This is where North America begins to dissolve into the Pacific, where the continent fragments into volcanic peaks rising from deep water. The islands are treeless, wind-scoured, and covered in tundra vegetation that clings low to the ground. Weather here is perpetually hostile. The Aleutians sit at the collision point between Arctic and Pacific air masses, creating storms that develop with astonishing speed and ferocity. Wind speeds routinely exceed 100 mph. Fog shrouds the islands for days at a time, reducing visibility to nothing. Waves batter coastlines relentlessly, carving cliffs and reshaping beaches with every storm. Dutch Harbor, on Unalaska Island, is the Aleutians' largest community and one of the busiest fishing ports in the United States. The harbor is sheltered enough to offer refuge, but only just. Boats crowd together during storms, waiting for conditions to improve enough to resume fishing. The town itself is functional, built for work rather than comfort. Warehouses, processing plants, and fuel depots dominate the waterfront. Housing is sparse and weather-beaten. During World War II, the Aleutians became a battlefield. Japanese forces invaded and occupied Attu and Kiska Islands in 1942, the only part of North America to fall under enemy control during the war. The United States responded with a brutal campaign to retake the islands, fighting in conditions that killed as many soldiers through exposure and cold as through combat. Today, remnants of that war remain scattered across several islands, abandoned bunkers, rusting equipment, and graves marked by simple crosses. The Unangan people, also called Aleuts, have lived on these islands for thousands of years. They developed sophisticated maritime cultures, hunting sea mammals from kayaks made of driftwood and sea lion skin. During World War II, the U.S. government forcibly evacuated Unangan communities, relocating them to internment camps in southeast Alaska. Many never returned. The villages they left behind were destroyed or abandoned, and the cultural disruption left wounds that persist across generations. The Aleutians remain militarily significant. Radar installations and communication facilities dot the islands, monitoring air and sea traffic across the North Pacific. This is strategic ground, positioned between two continents, a reminder that geography still matters even in an age of satellites and long-range missiles. Each adapted to specific regions and resources. The Ayupiat in the Arctic, the Yupik and Kupik in the southwest, the Athabaskan peoples in the interior, the Tlingit and Haida in the southeast, and the Unangan in the Aleutians. Each developed distinct languages, traditions, and ways of life shaped by the environments they inhabited. These were not static societies frozen in time. They were dynamic cultures, with trade networks that spanned thousands of miles, sophisticated technologies for hunting and fishing, oral traditions that preserved knowledge across generations, and social structures that managed resources sustainably. When Russians arrived in the 18th century, they encountered peoples who had thrived in Alaska for more than 10,000 years. Colonization brought devastation. Disease killed thousands who had no immunity to smallpox, measles, and influenza. The Russian-American company enslaved Unangan hunters, forcing them to harvest sea otters and fur seals until populations collapsed. Cultural practices were suppressed, Languages were forbidden in schools, and children were sent to boarding schools far from home where they were punished for speaking their native tongues. The Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971 attempted to resolve land claims and provide compensation, but it did so through a corporate structure foreign to traditional governance. Native lands were organized into regional and village corporations, with shareholders receiving dividends from resource development. The system brought economic opportunities, but also introduced conflicts over land use, resource extraction, and the preservation of cultural practices. Today, Alaska Native cultures are experiencing both revival and continued pressure. Languages that were nearly lost are being taught again in schools. Traditional practices like hunting, fishing, and gathering remain central to identity and subsistence. Elders work to pass knowledge to younger generations before it is lost entirely. But challenges remain. Alcoholism, suicide, and poverty rates are disproportionately high in Native communities. Villages are eroding into the sea, forcing entire communities to consider relocation. Yet resilience persists. Native organizations are increasingly asserting sovereignty over traditional lands and resources. Artists, writers, and activists are reclaiming narratives and challenging stereotypes. The story of Indigenous Alaska is not one of disappearance or assimilation, but of adaptation, resistance, and survival. Climate change. Alaska is warming faster than almost anywhere else on Earth. Temperatures have risen approximately twice as fast as the global average, a phenomenon known as Arctic amplification. The consequences are visible, measurable, and accelerating. Permafrost, ground that has remained frozen for thousands of years, is thawing. As it thaws, the soil becomes unstable. Buildings tilt and crack. Roads buckle and collapse. Entire hillsides slump and slide, reshaping the landscape. Infrastructure built on the assumption of frozen ground is failing, requiring expensive repairs or complete relocation. Coastal villages are disappearing. Sea ice that once protected shorelines from storm surges is forming later and melting earlier each year. Without that ice, waves batter the coast with increasing force, eroding land at rates that can exceed 100 feet per year. Villages like Kivalina, Shishmaref, and Newtok face an existential choice: relocate entirely, or watch the ocean claim their homes piece by piece. Relocation is extraordinarily expensive, costing hundreds of millions of dollars for communities of only a few hundred people. Funding is uncertain, and the legal frameworks for managed retreat barely exist. Forests are changing. Spruce bark beetles, once limited by cold winters, are surviving in greater numbers and expanding their range. Warmer temperatures allow the beetles to complete their life cycle faster, leading to explosive population growth. Vast stretches of forest have been killed, turning green hillsides brown and gray. Dead trees become fuel for wildfires, which are increasing in size, frequency, and intensity. Smoke from Alaskan fires has drifted as far south as Seattle and even California, contributing to regional air quality crises. Fisheries are shifting. Salmon runs are arriving earlier or later than historical norms, disrupting the timing that subsistence and commercial fishers depend on. Water temperatures in rivers are rising, stressing salmon and making them more vulnerable to disease. Some populations are declining sharply, threatening both ecosystems and the communities that depend on them. Wildlife is adjusting. Moose populations are declining in some regions, possibly due to increased parasites and heat stress. Caribou herds are showing signs of stress, with changes in migration patterns and declining calf survival. Polar bears, dependent on sea ice for hunting seals, are spending more time on land, where food is scarce and conflicts with humans increase. These changes are not abstract or theoretical. They are lived experiences for Alaskans, particularly those in rural and native communities where the connection to the land is immediate and essential. Traditional ecological knowledge, accumulated over thousands of years, is becoming less reliable as the patterns it describes no longer hold. Elders can no longer predict weather or ice conditions with the accuracy they once could. The land is changing faster than knowledge can adapt. Denali, Rangel St. Elias, Glacier Bay, Katmai, Gates of the Arctic. These parks cover millions of acres, preserving ecosystems, wildlife, and landscapes that have largely disappeared elsewhere. Rangel St. Elias National Park is the largest national park in the United States, covering over 13 million acres, larger than Yellowstone, Yosemite, and Switzerland combined. It contains the greatest concentration of peaks, over 14,500 feet in North America, including Mount St. Elias, the second highest peak in the United States. Glaciers flow from the mountains in broad sheets of ice, and rivers carry sediment-laden meltwater toward the coast. The park is so large that most of it is rarely visited, with vast sections that see no human presence for years at a time. Gates of the Arctic National Park has no roads, no trails, and no facilities. It is wilderness in the purest sense, a place where visitors must be entirely self-sufficient. The park protects the Central Brooks Range, a mountain chain that forms the northern boundary of the boreal forest and the southern boundary of the Arctic tundra. Caribou migrate through in massive herds. Wolves, grizzlies, and wolverines hunt across valleys where human scent is absent. This is land that operates on its own terms, where the idea of management feels almost absurd. The park is not managed so much as it is simply protected from development and left alone. Katmai National Park is known for its brown bears, particularly those that gather at Brooks Falls each summer to catch salmon leaping upstream. Viewing platforms allow visitors to watch from a safe distance as bears wade into the river, timing their strikes to catch fish mid-air. The concentration of bears here is extraordinary, sometimes more than a dozen visible at once, a reminder of what abundance looks like when left intact. But even in these protected areas, challenges persist. Glaciers are retreating, permafrost is thawing, wildfires are increasing, invasive species are spreading. Climate change does not respect boundaries, even those drawn by Congress. The parks preserve space, but they cannot freeze time. Change is happening here as it is everywhere else, just more slowly and with more room for ecosystems to adjust. Winter is not just cold, it is dark in a way that reshapes daily life. In Utqiagvik, the sun sets in mid-November and does not rise again until late January. That is more than 2 months of continuous darkness, broken only by a few hours of twilight around midday. The absence of sunlight affects the body profoundly. Circadian rhythms, evolved over millions of years to respond to day and night cycles, become disrupted. Sleep patterns fall apart, energy levels drop, mood declines. Seasonal affective disorder is common, a form of depression directly linked to lack of sunlight. Vitamin D deficiency becomes a serious health issue, requiring supplementation for those who cannot produce it naturally through sun exposure. Artificial light becomes critical. Homes are lit brightly, sometimes around the clock. Light therapy lamps, which emit bright white light mimicking sunlight, are common. Schools and workplaces adjust schedules to account for the challenges of functioning in near-total darkness. Some people thrive in winter darkness, finding peace in the stillness and quiet. Others struggle deeply, counting the days until the sun returns. When the sun does return, it happens slowly at first. A faint glow appears on the southern horizon, lasting minutes. Each day, the glow lasts longer, growing brighter, until finally the sun breaches the horizon and light returns. Communities celebrate the return of the sun with festivals, gatherings, and public acknowledgement that the hardest part of winter has passed. But the transition to summer brings its own challenges. When the sun does not set, sleep becomes difficult again. Blackout curtains are essential for those trying to maintain any kind of normal sleep schedule. Children play outside at midnight, unable to sense that it is late. Adults work extended hours, losing track of time in the endless daylight. The body struggles to know when to rest, and exhaustion accumulates without the natural cue of darkness. Light and darkness in Alaska are not minor details. They are defining features of life, shaping health, mood, work, and community in ways that people in the lower 48 states rarely consider. For these places, planes are the primary connection to the outside world, bringing mail, cargo, medical supplies, and people. Bush pilots are a distinct profession here, operating small aircraft in conditions that would ground most pilots elsewhere. They land on gravel bars, frozen lakes, and short dirt strips carved into hillsides. They navigate mountain passes in variable weather, flying low when visibility drops, and climbing high when turbulence makes low-altitude flight impossible. The work is dangerous. Alaska has one of the highest aviation accident rates in the United States. Crashes are frequent, often caused by weather, mechanical failure, or the sheer difficulty of flying in terrain with few landmarks and fewer emergency landing options. For small communities, the arrival of the mail plane is a significant event. People gather at the airstrip, waiting to see who is arriving, what cargo is being delivered, and whether their own orders have come in. The plane might bring groceries, medical supplies, or a part needed to repair essential equipment. If the plane cannot fly due to weather, the community waits. There is no alternative. Medevac flights save lives regularly. When someone in a remote village suffers a serious injury or medical emergency, a plane is dispatched to evacuate them to a hospital. These flights operate in conditions most pilots would refuse, because delay means death. Pilots fly in fog, snow, and wind, navigating by instrument and experience, knowing that someone's survival depends on their arrival. Float planes are ubiquitous in coastal and lake-rich regions. They land on water, allowing access to places where no airstrip exists. In summer, float planes ferry fishermen, hunters, and supplies to remote cabins and camps. In winter, they are swapped for skis, landing on frozen lakes and snow-covered clearings. The versatility of small aircraft in Alaska makes movement possible in a landscape that otherwise would isolate communities completely. And that human systems are fragile when tested by distance, cold, and isolation. The infrastructure that most of the world depends on, constant connectivity, reliable transportation, abundant resources, exists here only in fragments, and always provisionally. This is not a land defeated by progress. It is a land that remains, largely, unconquered. Roads end. Towns exist in isolation. Weather closes airports and harbors. The wilderness is not a park or a preserve set aside for recreation. It is the dominant feature, the default condition, the landscape that defines everything else. People live here not because it is easy, but because they have always lived here, or because they chose to leave somewhere else and accept the trade-offs Alaska demands. Those trade-offs are real. Heating costs are high. Food is expensive. Medical care is distant. Darkness stretches long in winter, and light stretches long in summer, distorting time and exhausting the body's natural rhythms. But Alaska also offers something most places have lost: space to exist without crowding, silence that is not interrupted, and the knowledge that the land around you operates on terms you cannot rewrite. The bears do not care about property lines. The glaciers do not adjust their retreat to accommodate development. The sea does not calm because a ferry is scheduled to leave. In Alaska, humans remain visitors, even when they have lived here for generations. The land allows presence, but it does not grant dominance. Respect is earned by adaptation, by learning when to move and when to wait, by understanding that control is temporary and often illusory. This is life at the absolute edge of the modern world. Not because Alaska is primitive or backward, but because it is a place where the planet's older rhythms still govern, where winter still means danger, where distance still matters, and where the forces that built the land remain stronger than the forces attempting to reshape it. Alaska does not resist modernity. It simply continues, with or without it.